Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Podcasts with Ali and Aiza. I'm Aiza, and as always, I'm here with my wonderful co-host.
Hey there, everyone. Ali here, and wow, are we excited about today's episode. You know, we've been getting so many messages from our listeners asking us to cover expressions that native speakers use all the time, but that don't always make it into traditional English textbooks. So today, we're diving into exactly that, those natural, everyday phrases that can really level up your English and make you sound more fluent and confident in conversations.
Absolutely, and I love this topic because these are the kinds of expressions that when you start using them, people actually think, wow, this person really knows English. They're not complicated or fancy, but they add such a natural flow to your speaking. Today, we're focusing on two amazing expressions, give or take and by and large. Now, before anyone gets worried thinking these sound difficult, trust me, they're super easy to understand and even easier to use once you get the hang of them. We're going to walk you through everything step by step, give you tons of examples, and by the end of this episode, you'll be using these phrases like a native speaker. So, Ali, are you ready to jump in?
I'm totally ready. And you know what? I want to start with a story because I think that's the best way to learn. Just this morning, I was talking to my friend Sarah about her new apartment, and she said something really interesting. She told me, I live about 20 minutes from the city center, give or take 5 minutes, depending on traffic. And you know what's funny? When I first started learning English, I would have been so confused by that phrase. I would have thought, wait, give what? Take what? But now I use it all the time, and it's such a useful expression. It basically means approximately or more or less, but it sounds so much more natural than just saying approximately. When you say give or take, you're telling someone that the number you're giving isn't exact, but it's close enough. So Sarah wasn't saying her commute is exactly 20 minutes. Sometimes it might be 18, sometimes 22, sometimes 25. But around 20 minutes, give or take.
That's such a perfect example, and I love how you explained that because it really shows how this phrase works in real life. You see, this is exactly the kind of expression that makes your English sound more relaxed and conversational. Instead of saying, it's approximately 20 minutes, which sounds very formal and textbook-like, you say, it's 20 minutes, give or take. And suddenly you sound like someone who's really comfortable with the language. I use this phrase constantly. Just yesterday, I was at the grocery store, and the cashier asked me how long I'd been waiting in line. I told her, oh, about 10 minutes, give or take. See how natural that sounds? I wasn't being super precise because honestly, who counts every single minute when they're standing in line? It could have been 8 minutes, it could have been 12, but around 10 minutes, give or take.
Exactly. And that brings up such a good point about when to use this expression. You use give or take when you're talking about quantities, times, distances, or amounts that are approximate. You're not being lazy or vague. You're actually being realistic because in real life, we don't always have exact numbers, right? Think about it. If someone asks you how much you spent on groceries this month, you might say $300, give or take 50. If they ask how long you've been studying English, you could say 2 years, give or take a few months. Or if someone wants to know how many people came to your party, you might say 30 people, give or take. See, it works with money, time, numbers of people, distances, basically any measurement where you want to give a rough estimate rather than an exact figure.
And here's something really cool that I want our listeners to notice. After give or take, you usually add what the variation might be. So it's not just 20 minutes, give or take, and stop there. You usually say 20 minutes, give or take 5, or 20 minutes, give or take a bit. This helps the other person understand how approximate your estimate is. If you say, the project will cost $10,000, give or take 100, that's pretty close to $10,000. But if you say the project will cost $10,000, give or take 2,000, well, that's a much bigger range, right? So you're actually giving useful information by specifying what you're adding or subtracting from your estimate. Now, I want to share another real-life example that happened to me last week. I was planning a road trip with some friends, and one of them asked me how far the beach was from our city. I looked it up and told everyone, it's about 250 kilometers, give or take 20, depending on which route we take. See how natural that fits into conversation?
I love that. And it's so practical too, because you're acknowledging that different routes might make the distance vary slightly. That's real life. Numbers aren't always exact, and give or take is the perfect way to communicate that. Now, let me give you some more examples so our listeners can really get comfortable with this expression. Imagine you're talking about your work schedule. You might say, I work 8 hours a day, give or take half an hour, depending on how busy we are. Or let's say you're describing how much sleep you get. I usually sleep 7 hours a night, give or take an hour. What about discussing ages? He's 40 years old, give or take a couple of years. I'm not exactly sure. Or talking about the size of something. That table is 2 meters long, give or take 10 centimeters. You can even use it with really big numbers. The company has 500 employees, give or take 50. See how versatile this expression is?
It really is incredibly versatile, and I think what makes it so useful is that it's polite, too. Sometimes when people ask you for specific information and you don't know the exact answer, it can feel awkward. But when you use give or take, you're being honest about not having the precise number while still being hopeful. You're essentially saying, I'm giving you my best estimate, and here's how much it might vary. That's so much better than just guessing and stating a number as if it's fact, right? Okay, so now that we've really explored give or take, let's move on to our second expression for today, by and large. This is another one of those phrases that native speakers use all the time, and it can really make your English sound more sophisticated and natural.
Oh, I love this expression. By and large is so useful because it means generally speaking or on the whole or for the most part. It's what you use when you want to make a general statement, but acknowledge that there might be some exceptions. Let me give you a perfect example from my own life. Last month, I started going to a new gym, and after a few weeks, my friend asked me how I liked it. I told him, by and large, it's a great gym. The equipment is modern, the staff is friendly, and it's not too crowded. There are a couple of things I'd change, like the locker room could be cleaner, but by and large, I'm really happy with it. See what I did there? I was giving my overall opinion while acknowledging that it's not absolutely perfect in every single way. That's exactly what by and large does. It lets you make a general statement without claiming that something is 100% true in every situation.
That's such a clear explanation, and I think that's why this expression is so useful in everyday conversation. Life is rarely black and white, right? Things are usually good overall, with a few downsides, or maybe they're okay in general with some really great aspects. By and large captures that nuance perfectly. I use it a lot when I'm talking about my experiences. For example, I recently took an online course, and when people ask me about it, I tell them, by and large, the course was excellent. The instructor was knowledgeable, the content was well organized, and I learned a lot. There were a few technical issues with the website, but by and large, I definitely recommend it. See what I did there? I was giving my overall opinion while acknowledging that it's not absolutely perfect in every single way. That's exactly what by and large does. It lets you make a general statement without claiming that something is 100% true in every situation.
Absolutely. And here's another great thing about by and large. It makes you sound thoughtful and balanced in your opinions. When you use this expression, you're showing that you've considered different aspects of something and you're giving a fair, measured evaluation. Let me give you some more examples so everyone can see how this works in different contexts. Imagine you're talking about your job. You might say, by and large, I enjoy my work. Sure, there are stressful days and sometimes the meetings run too long, but by and large, I'm satisfied with my career choice. Or think about describing a restaurant. By and large, the food was delicious. We had one appetizer that was a bit salty, but by and large, everything else was fantastic. What about talking about a book you read? By and large, it was an entertaining novel. The plot was engaging and the characters were well developed, though by and large, I thought the ending could have been stronger. See how it works?
Those are excellent examples. And I want to point out something important about the placement of by and large in a sentence. You can put it at the beginning, like, by and large, the conference was well organized, Or you can put it in the middle, like the conference was, by and large, well organized. Both are correct. Native speakers tend to use it at the beginning more often because it sets up the general statement right away, but you'll hear it in the middle of sentences too. Now, let me share a real conversation I had recently that perfectly illustrates how to use this phrase. I was talking to my neighbor about our apartment building, and she asked me if I liked living there. I told her, by and large, yes. The location is convenient, the building is quiet, and most of the neighbors are friendly. There are some maintenance issues that take a while to get fixed, and the parking situation isn't ideal, but by and large, I'm really happy here. Can you see how that sounds so much more natural and balanced than just saying, yes, I like it, or listing out every single pro and con?
That's perfect. And you know what I find interesting? Both of these expressions we're learning today, give or take and by and large, serve a similar purpose in a way. They both help you communicate more realistically and naturally. Give or take acknowledges that numbers aren't always exact, and by and large acknowledges that opinions and situations aren't always absolute. They both make your English sound more mature and nuanced. I think that's why native speakers love these expressions so much. They reflect how we actually think and experience the world, which is rarely in absolutes. Now, I want to give our listeners even more examples of by and large so they can really internalize this expression. Think about discussing a city you visited. By and large, Tokyo was an amazing city to visit. It was expensive and sometimes overwhelming, but by and large, it was an incredible experience. Or talking about a product you bought. By and large, this laptop has been reliable. I've had a few minor software glitches, but by and large, it performs well. What about describing someone's character? By and large, he's an honest person. He might bend the truth occasionally about small things, but by and large, you can trust what he says. See how it works?
These are all fantastic examples. And I want to emphasize something really important for our listeners. Using expressions like by and large doesn't mean you're being wishy-washy or indecisive. You're actually being more accurate and honest. When you acknowledge that something is generally good but not perfect, or generally true but with some exceptions, you're painting a more complete picture. People appreciate that kind of balanced perspective. It makes you sound thoughtful rather than extreme. Plus, it's actually closer to how native speakers think and talk. We don't usually deal in absolutes. We think in terms of usually, mostly, generally, and for the most part. That's exactly what by and large captures. Now, let me tell you about a conversation I had with my boss last week. She asked me how the new team member was working out, and I said, by and large, she's been a great addition to the team. She's quick to learn, very professional, and gets along well with everyone. She's still getting used to our software systems, but by and large, I'm really pleased with how she's fitting in. My boss really appreciated that response because it was honest and complete. I acknowledged the learning curve while emphasizing the overall positive impression.
That's such a professional way to give feedback. And it shows how these expressions can be valuable in a work context, too. Speaking of different contexts, I think it's worth mentioning that both of these expressions we're learning today, give or take and by and large, are pretty neutral expressions. You can use them in casual conversations with friends, in professional settings at work, in emails and presentations. They're versatile and appropriate for many situations. They're not too formal and not too casual, which makes them perfect for learners to add to their vocabulary. Now, here's what I want our listeners to do. Try to start noticing these expressions when you watch English movies, TV shows, or YouTube videos. Once you start looking for them, you'll realize just how often native speakers use them. I was watching a cooking show the other day, and the chef said, this recipe takes about 45 minutes, give or take, depending on your oven. And then later, she said, by and large, I prefer using fresh herbs over dried ones. See, they pop up everywhere once you're aware of them.
That's such a great point. Noticing these expressions in real content is one of the best ways to learn how they're used naturally. And you know what else I love about these two phrases? They're easy to remember because they're quite short, and they have a nice rhythm to them. Give or take. It's almost like a little rhyme with those two strong syllables. By and large. It has this nice flow to it that makes them stick in your memory better than some longer, more complicated expressions. Now, I want to share a few more real-world situations where you might use these. Imagine you're planning a party, and someone asks you how many people you've invited. You could say 40 people, give or take 10, because I'm not sure everyone can make it. Or let's say someone asks you about your experience learning a new language. You might say, by and large, it's been challenging but rewarding. There are definitely frustrating moments when I can't express what I want to say, but by and large, I'm making good progress and enjoying the journey.
Perfect examples. And those are situations that many of our listeners can probably relate to directly. You know, I think one of the best things about learning expressions like these is that they give you more tools to express yourself precisely. Before you knew give or take, you might have struggled to express that something is approximate. You might have said about or around, which work fine, but give or take adds that extra layer of natural fluency. Similarly, before you knew by and large, you might have said generally or usually, which are good words, but by and large has a slightly different nuance. It's more about your overall assessment of something rather than just frequency. Let me give you one more set of examples to really drive this home. If someone asks you about your health, you might say, by and large, I'm pretty healthy. I get the occasional cold and my back bothers me sometimes, but by and large, I feel good. Or if someone asks how long your morning routine takes, you could say, about an hour, give or take 15 minutes, depending on whether I'm running late or taking my time.
Those are excellent. And I think we've given our listeners such a comprehensive understanding of these two expressions now. But you know what? Understanding is just the first step. The real magic happens when you start using them yourself. So here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to have an interactive section where we practice these expressions. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want all of our listeners to answer out loud along with you. Don't worry about making mistakes. This is a safe space to practice. Are you ready for this?
I'm totally ready. Let's do this. And yes, everyone listening, please actually speak out loud. I know it might feel a bit silly if you're alone, but speaking out loud is so important for building your confidence and fluency. Your brain needs to practice forming these sounds and using these expressions in real time. So don't just think the answers, say them. Okay, first question. How long does it take you to get to work or school every day? And try to use give or take in your answer. I'll give you a few seconds to think. Okay, here's my answer. It takes me about 35 minutes to get to work, give or take 5 or 10 minutes, depending on traffic. Now you try. How long does it take you? Go ahead and say it out loud. Great. How did that feel? Now let's try another one.
Perfect. Okay, here's the next question. And this time I want you to use by and large in your response. The question is, do you enjoy the city or town where you live? Think about the overall picture, the good things and the maybe not so great things. Now answer using by and large. Take your time. Here's my answer. By and large, yes, I enjoy living in my city. It's busy and sometimes noisy, and the cost of living is high. But by and large, I love the energy, the cultural opportunities, and the diverse food scene. Your turn. Tell me about where you live using by and large. Excellent. I hope you're really practicing this out loud because that's where the real learning happens.
And let's do one more practice question that combines both expressions. This is a bit more challenging, but I know you can do it. Here's the question. How would you describe your experience learning English so far? Try to use both give or take and by and large in your answer if you can. Let me show you how I'd answer. I've been studying English for about 3 years now, give or take a few months. And by and large, it's been an incredibly rewarding journey. There have definitely been challenging moments like when I couldn't understand native speakers or when grammar rules seemed impossible. But by and large, I'm really proud of how far I've come. Now your turn. Describe your English learning journey using both expressions. Fantastic! The more you practice using these incomplete sentences, the more natural they'll become.
You're all doing amazing. And I hope you can feel the difference these expressions make in your speaking. They add sophistication without being overly complicated. They make you sound more like a native speaker without requiring you to memorize long, difficult vocabulary. Now, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to give you all a little homework assignment. Over the next week, I challenge you to use each of these expressions at least 3 times in real conversations. It could be with a language partner, a friend, a teacher, or even just talking to yourself as you go about your day. The important thing is to actively use them, not just understand them passively. You could talk about how long your commute takes using give or take, or you could describe your opinion of a movie or restaurant using by and large. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become, until eventually you won't even have to think about it. They'll just flow out naturally when you speak.
That's such a great homework assignment. And honestly, I think our listeners are going to be amazed at how quickly these expressions become part of their active vocabulary once they start consciously using them. You know, when I was learning English, I remember the moment when expressions like these started coming out naturally without me having to think about them. It was such an exciting feeling because I realized I was actually becoming fluent, not just learning isolated words and grammar rules. These little expressions are like the seasoning in cooking. They're what make your English flavorful and authentic. And the beautiful thing is that you don't need to know thousands of complicated words to sound fluent. Sometimes it's these simple, everyday expressions that make the biggest difference.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the philosophy behind our podcast. We want to help you learn the kind of English that people actually use in real life. The expressions, the phrases, the natural flow of conversation that makes you sound confident and authentic. Today, we focused on just 2 expressions, but think about how much more natural your English will sound now that you can use give or take and by and large correctly. And if you keep learning these kinds of practical expressions episode by episode, week by week, you'll build up this amazing toolkit of natural English before you know it. You'll be the one that other English learners look up to thinking, wow, they sound so natural.
That's right. And remember, learning a language is a journey, not a destination. Some days you'll feel like you're making huge progress, and some days you might feel stuck. But by and large, see what I did there? If you keep practicing consistently, you will improve. Every episode you listen to, every time you practice speaking, every conversation you have in English, you're building your skills. It might take a year or 2 or 3, give or take. There I go again. But if you stay committed, you'll get there. And we're here to support you every step of the way through these podcast episodes.
We really are. And we love hearing from you all. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us with your questions, your progress updates, or even just to practice using the expressions we've taught you. You can find us on social media, leave comments on our podcast platform, or send us emails. We read everything, and we're always so inspired by your dedication to learning English. Your success is our success. Now, before we say goodbye for today, let me do a quick recap of what we've learned. We covered 2 essential expressions, give or take, which means approximately or more or less, used when giving estimates about quantities, times, or measurements, and by and large, which means generally speaking or on the whole, used when making general statements that might have some exceptions.
Perfect summary. And remember, the key to mastering these is practice. Listen to this episode again if you need to, take notes, and most importantly, start using these expressions in your own conversations. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we learn. Every native speaker started as a beginner too, and the only way they got better was by practicing, making mistakes, and learning from them. You've got this. We believe in you, and we're so grateful that you chose to spend this time learning with us today.
We absolutely are. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Podcast with Ollie and Aiza. We had such a great time teaching you these expressions, and we hope you had fun learning them too. Remember to do your homework, use these expressions at least 3 times this week, and come back for our next episode where we'll be diving into even more useful English expressions that will take your speaking to the next level. Until then, keep practicing, stay motivated, and most importantly, enjoy the journey of learning English.
Keep speaking, keep learning, and keep being awesome. See you in the next episode.
Goodbye, everyone, and happy learning.